And now, America's most exciting radio talk show, The Savage Nation, home of unprotected talk, borders, language, culture. And here he is, Michael Savage.
1-855-400-SAVAGE. It's 1-855-400-7282. You're listening to The Savage Nation. This is John DePetro sitting in for Dr. Michael Savage. Remember our website. It's michaelsavage.com. The new book is coming out, The Countdown to Mecca. Now, it's going to be available on May 12th, but it's available right now on the website if you go to michaelsavage.com. You also get the latest stories and updates. Start your day at michaelsavage.com. Pressure grows on Marines to consider lowering combat standards for women. Washington Times with the story that apparently 2 years ago, Army General Martin Dempsey, nation's top military officer, laid down an edict on the Obama administration and their plan to open direct land combat jobs to women. If women cannot meet a standard, senior commanders better have a good reason why it should not be lowered. Today, the, quote, Dempsey rule appears to have its first test case. The Marine Corps just finished research to see if female officers could successfully complete its rigorous infantry officer course. Now, I especially want to hear from those that have served that whether or not, I don't think it has to be that you were a Marine, but whether or not Marines, should we consider lowering combat standards for women? Apparently, a big part of this, you know what's interesting is, you think about, obviously women serve as police officers, women serve in the military, women serve as firefighters and various other jobs. But one of the main criteria that seems to fall short is, in fact, they have to earn the designation of infantry officer. 29 women who tried, none graduated. Only 4 made it through the first day's combat endurance test. Now, the Marine Corps officials said it didn't have the data on which proved the toughest, but one particularly demanding upper body strength test is climbing a 25-foot rope with a backpack full of gear. A candidate who cannot crawl to the top fails the test. Traditionally see 0 for 29 performance as a call to arms by those inside the Pentagon who are determined to have significant number of women in the infantry. Now, the question, you do have other countries, obviously, that have women serving in combat. Is it, in fact, do you think, are the standards outdated? Is that the part that should maybe be relooked at? Or is it just that the fact that maybe for this type of infantry that women candidates, for whatever reason, are unable to complete it? So I think the real question, and we'll talk about it at 1-855-400-SAVAGE. If you're a woman that has served, maybe you're a woman that's even taken that test, but the pressure is now growing on the Marine Corps to consider lowering the combat standards for women. You know what's interesting is the story is not pressure is growing on women to adhere to the standards that the Marines set. The pressure is growing on the Marine Corps to lower the standards. And those on the other side argue the standards are not realistic. And they point to other countries. Now keep in mind, United States, we are the finest fighting top military power in the world. Danish females fought in infantry units in Afghanistan. Norway places no restrictions on women roles and drafts them for mandatory military duty. Canadian women serve in combat units. And physical standards are scientifically correlated to essential combat tasks. In New Zealand, females comprise 6% of the officers in combat and operation branches. I think this is one of those classic, do we lower the standard, or do you try to bring people up to the standard? Apparently, the Marines are under pressure to re-examine exactly what the standards are. Are those standards necessary? Are those standards? I mean, that's pretty telling. You have to admit that you have all of these women in the military serving honorably, and yet when it comes to this particular test and the ability to do that, and it also, I think, don't you think it's interesting? We are constantly told there's no difference. I mean, there's without question been a move to try to make everything gender neutral. Anyone that has spent any time in a school recently, children, everything is constantly trying to be gender neutral and trying to ingrain in young minds there's no difference between little boys and little girls. You shouldn't just have little girls playing with dolls, and you shouldn't just have little boys playing with toy guns and soldiers. And yet now we have the Marines are being forced to consider lowering the combat standards for women. We're going to talk about that. Again, 1-855-400-SAVAGE, 1-855-400-7282. Again, this is John DePetro sitting in for Dr. Michael Savage. You know, there's another story I came across in Marine Times where a tough tattoo regulation is sinking a stellar Marine career. That apparently now there are certain Marines that got tattoos, and it's now going to prevent them from continuing in their service. And many of them say, hey, listen, when I was in the trenches at Afghanistan, it certainly didn't seem to bother anyone that I had these tattoos. And now you have people that have served with distinction and serve honorably of their country, and suddenly now being held back. But I come back to the standards. And if a standard is unrealistic, the Washington Times wrote an editorial saying, you need more information because you have to determine if this is a realistic standard. In schools, we're constantly dealing with standards. I mean, you hate to have a situation where any standard is lowered. Every standard, don't you think it should always be you want to, in sports we call it you coach them up. You want to bring them up to the level as opposed to lowering the bar. We're constantly seemingly lowering the bar. But that said, it doesn't make sense if, in fact, you have all these women that are seemingly qualified in all these different areas, and yet in this particular test, they're unable to pass it. But you think of some of the missions that maybe would be sent out on, some of the operations, the different assignments that are sent on. You need everyone completely at their tops. And that would not be a situation where you would want any of the standards lowered. But suddenly now, is it trying to accommodate and adapt, or is it in fact, more political correctness of lowering it? I'm not surprised in a way that this is happening under the Obama administration. I mean, if anything, people set a goal. We want to have a certain number adhere to this. And then is that realistic that those that are taking part, in this case, it would be women in the military, whether or not they can in fact achieve this? Now, if you'd like to read the story, it's actually on our website. If you go to michaelsavage.com, you see all the latest stories. We are going to talk Marco Rubio in the news, under fire for an interview that he did in Spanish, where he's actually talking about immigration. Hillary Clinton is out on the campaign stump in New Hampshire today. We're going to bring you some of the sound of that with her fake campaign that she is trying to seem like she's talking to real people. We'll see who she runs into today and whether or not she takes off the dark sunglasses. But whenever you see a story like this, you have to admit, I mean, you hate to have any scenario where we're in fact lowering standards. There has to be something more behind it. And, now the pressure is growing on the Marines on whether or not they should lower the combat standards for women. Maybe it is a matter of uncertain assignments, or whether or not maybe it is just unrealistic for some of the assignments and roles and regiment that they're put on when you're talking about the United States Marines. So we'll take your calls on that as well. Now, again, I would especially like to hear if you're a woman and you've served our country, maybe you currently are serving, and you have specific maybe information about this or know exactly why that is, or maybe we shouldn't lower. Maybe the standards should remain where they are. It's just a matter of those that are participating need to try to raise the bar. Maybe we need to become more realistic. Maybe it's only certain missions. And we'll talk about that as well. You can call into the program 1-855-400-SAVAGE, or it's 1-855-400-7282. There's also a tremendous story about someone finding some dog tags. Wait till I tell you about this. Just how long ago that they believed that they were lost and found, and we'll talk about that as well. It's John DePetro sitting in for the one and only Dr. Michael Savage. We're going to come back. We'll take your phone calls. You are listening to the Savage Nation.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
My Savage Nation is sponsored by SwissAmerica.com. It's the only company I trust to protect my wealth.
You know that? 1-855-400-SAVAGE. 1-855-400-7282. You are tuned to the Savage Nation. This is John DePetro sitting in for Dr. Michael Savage. Remember our website? It's michaelsavage.com. Make sure you visit the website. Dr. Savage's new book, which is available right now to pre-order, Countdown to Mecca. You can pre-order it. You can also see many of the bestsellers that Dr. Savage has written. It is going to be available now May 12th, but you can pre-order it now at the website at michaelsavage.com. Pressure grows on Marines to consider lowering combat standards for women. How often do we hear about lowering standards? How often do we hear about we need to have people raise up their game? Well, as a result of 2 years ago, when Army General Martin Dempsey, and again, Washington Times with the story, the nation's top military officer, laid down an edict on the Obama administration's plan to open direct land combat jobs to women. If women cannot meet a standard, senior commanders better have a good reason why it should not be lowered. The Dempsey rule appears to have its first test case. The Marine Corps just finished research to see if female officers could successfully complete its training. And right now, a diplomat must be able to earn the designation of infantry officer. 29 women who tried, none graduated. Only 4 made it through the first day's combat endurance test. Marine Corps officials said it did not have data right now on what part of this proved the toughest for women. But one particularly demanding upper body strength test is climbing 25-foot rope with a backpack full of gear. A candidate who cannot crawl to the top fails the test. So you have 0 for 29 performance as a call to arms by those inside the Pentagon, determined to have a significant number of women in the infantry. But at what cost? They're on the lookout for standards they believe are no longer relevant in today's battlefield. At what cost? Do we want to promote people and lower the standards?